Madam President, good morning once again. And good morning to members on this side of the House, to the member opposite, to persons in the gallery, and to those who are listening and viewing this sitting of our Parliament. Madam President, I wish to use a few moments to make a brief statement as per the order paper. And I wish to do so, Madam President, in my capacity as the Minister with responsibility for water here on the island of Nevis. I am happy, Madam President, to advise this Honorable House that on the 1st of November, we would have invited 5 drillers to provide for us some costing to do some drilling here on the island of Nevis. And we are targeting, Madam President, over 2.5 million gallons of water. Madam President, I want to backtrack a bit, that we would have sought the services of BRAC Consulting, a company who would have done some geological survey on the island of Nevis over a decade ago. And we felt, Madam President, that it was important to update that information to increase the probability of ensuring that we were able to have more updated data to do our water drilling. And that report, Madam President, was provided to us in August of 2023. Hence, we would have used that data to prepare a bid document and invite these 5 drillers. We would have invited Water and Oil Well Services Company Limited out of Trinidad and Tobago. We would have also invited Jamaica Wells from Jamaica. We invited, Madam President, EXO4 from St. Martin. We also, Madam President, reached out to H. Mario Williams on our sister island of St. Kitts. And finally, the 5th driller who we have reached out to is Mark Zyngen-Foss, hope I get that last name correct, of Zyngen-Foss Drilling Incorporated in the United States, Madam President. We are hoping, Madam President, that they will be able to return their tender documents by the 30th of November, which is the deadline for submission. And we have asked them, Madam President, to be able to show us in their document that they can be mobilized by the 1st of February on 2024. Because we are hoping that by the end of the 2nd quarter in 2024, that drilling exercise could be completed. We will be starting, Madam President, with 3 wells initially. The first will be at Stony Hill, the second at Braziers, and the third at Dason's Estate. And I want to pause here, Madam President, and to thank the various landowners, because we would have reached out to the various landowners and they have consented and given us their consent to do the necessary drilling and to utilize the various portions of their land. So I really want to thank the various landowners, Madam President. As I said, we are thinking in the initial stage to do approximately 3 wells, but we are hoping, Madam President, to do up to 6 wells in this exercise. Madam President, we have estimated that this project will cost upwards of $5 million. And I want to say to the people of Nevis that it is becoming extremely challenging to ensure that we have our capacity to provide the necessary water supply on the island of Nevis. It's becoming very challenging. For a number of reasons, Madam President. Many of our wells have long passed their useful life, many of them. And we have had, Madam President, to have extended pumping of those wells. We also, Madam President, have seen the rapid increase of everything to do with water. Our water meters the prices have escalated since COVID. Our stationery, our pipes, our fittings, our motors, all have increased exponentially, Madam President. And we are looking, Madam President, we are really looking at a possible increase in 2024 of our water rates. I'm saying it because we will have to decide on that very shortly, Madam President, as we are aware the budget discussion is ongoing. But I want to say to the people of Nevis that in 2024, there is serious consideration for the increase of our water rates. We will have to outlay over $5 million on this drilling project. All of our supplies have increased, Madam President, and we want to make sure that we can continue to have a stable and adequate supply of water for the people of Nevis. So I thought, Madam President, I would advise the people of Nevis as to where we are in terms of our water exploration and the consideration, Madam President, for water rate increase in 2024. Madam President, I want to encourage the people of Nevis to ensure that they do their civic duties and ensure that they can pay their water bills on time and in full. Let me make that appeal again. I want to encourage the people of Nevis to please ensure that you pay your water bill on time and in full, in an effort to ensure that we can have the necessary resources to provide this very important commodity to the people of Nevis. Now, that is one part of the equation, Madam President, the supply of potable water for the island of Nevis. But this water drilling project is also extremely important for the geothermal project, Madam President. I am told that the exploration wells for the geothermal project will need a significant volume of water for a number of months. And we want to ensure, Madam President, that when that drilling exploration for our geothermal project gets on stream, the Nevis Water Department wants to be in a position to ensure that we can provide that water for the geothermal exploration that we are hoping that will come on stream in 2024. Madam President, I want to switch very quickly to disaster management. I also have oversight for disaster management here on the island of Nevis. And Madam President, I believe that we are all aware that in the last few weeks we have been threatened by Hurricane Tammy, and recently we have seen some significant rainfall here on the island of Nevis. And Madam President, I believe that the island of Nevis, in my mind, stood up reasonably well to the onslaught of the volume of rainfall. We have seen, Madam President, because of the rapid intensity of that rainfall, we have seen some overflooding of some of our bridges. We have seen topping over of the bridge there by Powell, near the Charleston Secondary School. We have seen the topping over of the Nisbet Plantation Bridge, the Camps River Bridge next to ex-petrol gas station. And Madam President, some have said that this was a 100-year event because of the volume of rainfall that we have had in a very short period of time. But we recognize, Madam President, that these 100-year events are now happening every 5 or 10 years. It means, therefore, Madam President, that we have to build much more resilient. And we have to make sure, Madam President, that our infrastructure is such that we can withstand this kind of onslaught of Mother Nature, Madam President. Will we be able to do so entirely? I think not, because Mother Nature, Madam President, is a force of its own that we do not have any control over. We can just try and mitigate and protect against it as much as possible. We have received, Madam President, a significant volume of pictures and videos, and I want to thank the general public for the information that they have provided over the last few weeks, because that information will help us to look at our forward planning in terms of the designs of our various roadways and bridges and culverts, Madam President. It also highlights, Madam President, that there are some areas that we will have to redouble our efforts to ensure that we put in place some improved drainage. I have seen some water in the area of my good friend, Mr. the Pierce of Education, going down that road. And, Madam President, I believe that it would have almost taken a boat to get out of that area because of the volume of water. And we have seen number of videos throughout Nevis. It is good information, it is good data, and I want to ask the general public to continue to provide us with whatever information that they have on the recent flooding. We would have seen, Madam President, some areas of minimal damage. We had some washed out on the Pump Road. We have seen some washed out up in Rollins. And I believe, Madam President, that those were two areas that were under construction. Let me make that very clear. Those two areas that we saw, the significant washed out, were areas that were under construction. Our road network itself would have stand up reasonably well. And I want to thank the various engineers and supervisors who would have oversaw those projects, Madam President. Madam President, on staying with disaster, on Saturday evening we saw at the Cultural Village a gospel concert. Now some people may ask, why is disaster hosting gospel concert? You see, Madam President, that is the creativity, I think, of the good folks there at the disaster management. They would have partnered with the Ministry of Community Development to try and get out to the general public the various procedures, Madam President, as it regards to disaster management and getting out the necessary information. The theme for the gospel concert, Madam President, was resilience building a safer community through gospel music. And I want to say, Madam President, that I thought that the presentation, separate and apart from the gospel music itself, there were many public service announcements that gave some guidance, Madam President, to how our community can protect themselves and prepare themselves in the event of a disaster. We would have seen, Madam President, here on the island, our guest artist, Samuel Midas from Guyana, and from our neighboring island, M1. We also had Pastor Webb from St. Kitts, and I thought for a moment, I don't know if Minister Libel saw that performance, Pastor Webb. I almost for a moment thought that I was at a soca monarch competition. You see what I mean, Madam? You see what I mean, Madam President? The member for number 3 saying that he's from Gingerland. So I guess that that's where he gets that high energy, high level of performance from. And I thought it was very remarkable, Madam President. But I thought it was a good gospel concert, Madam President, mixed in with public service announcement to give our people the necessary information as it regards to disaster preparedness and disaster management. I want to thank the hardworking staff there at the disaster management in collaboration with our community development, the staff there at the community development, for ensuring that this event took place. It was postponed because of inclement weather, but I want to thank them for ensuring that it actually came off, Madam President. I want to thank the various artists. We also had many local artists. And perhaps it is an event that we can twin with something like health and education, because I thought that the synergy, Madam President, between disaster and gospel music was an interesting one. And I believe that the organizers and the planners was able to achieve what they wanted to achieve by getting the necessary public service announcement out to the general public. Madam President, I did say that I will be very brief, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to make my brief statement on the statement by ministers. Thank you, Madam President, and may it please.